Hello, Sigmas. My name is Joshua Hoover, and I'll be hosting today's installment of Twink Talks. I am joined by two of my dear friends and lovers, Daniel Lane
Meow.
and David Clark. On this episode of Twink Talks, we'll be discussing whether or not the pursuit of knowledge can be evil, specifically in the context of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
So buckle up. Let's get freaky and twinky.
Calm down, my furry friends. Let us begin this debate. As you may know, my position on the pursuit of knowledge mirrors many of the thinkers of antiquity, specifically those of the Platonic school. That is, that the pursuit of knowledge is the highest virtue, and in and of the fact that it is a virtue, it has no room to admit vice, and hence the pursuit of knowledge can never yield evil.
Although I'm not necessarily tied to a position here, I suppose I will take an argument against you. After reading Frankenstein, it seems that Victor's pursuit of knowledge is precisely what led to the death of everything he held dear, including himself. If Victor did not engage in the pursuit of knowledge, then clearly he would not have suffered all these ills, no?
Woof woof woof.
Thank you for the insight, David. Anyways, Daniel, since you and David are not too well acquainted with the methods of the dialectic, I shall break down my response into two parts. I'll first demonstrate why knowledge must be the highest virtue, and why it can never admit vice, and then I will move on to specifically address the case of our friend Victor Frankenstein. Let us for a moment suppose that you shouldn't necessarily believe what is true. On the surface, this may seem like a consistent skeptic position to hold. However, even holding the position that you shouldn't necessarily believe what is true implies that you are indeed believing what is true. If you fully hold to the position that you shouldn't necessarily believe what is true, you have no reason to believe this very position. Since you have no reason to hold this position, you have no grounds to assert this argument in debate or to believe it in the first place. Thus, by impossibility of the contrary, we see that each person ought to believe what is true. In other words, each person ought to obtain knowledge. Simple, right?
I'm not sure if I follow you.
This is to be expected. After all, you are merely a sophist's feet. Please rewind what I said and use your brain. Daniel, do you understand my argument insofar?
Yeah, I do.
Since we have proved that knowledge is good independent of any specific situation, we can state that the virtuosity of knowledge should not change based on any given situation. As I said earlier, this is the first reason why I could never believe that the evil of Frankenstein's actions was caused by knowledge. With this in mind, we can now move to the specific case of Victor Frankenstein and try to find the true fault behind his evil. If Victor Frankenstein truly cared about the pursuit of knowledge, he would realize that creating a hideous and destructive monster was not a good idea and could actually end up destroying him, which would in turn eliminate any chance of furthering his knowledge. This would mean that following the auto pursuit of knowledge, Frankenstein should have never created his monster. Yet, because Frankenstein was ignorant of this and absorbed by his ego, he created his monster, unknowingly sealing the destruction of himself and everyone he loved. Thus, we see that in reality, ignorance is at fault for Frankenstein's vices, not the other way around.
So the fault in Frankenstein's actions was not the pursuit of knowledge, but rather the fact that he was reckless.
Exactly so.
That's cool and all, but don't you have to admit that if Victor didn't commit the pursuit of knowledge, then the monster would have never been created?
I don't think you guys really understand what I'm saying. My point was that Victor was ignorant of the true pursuit of knowledge. At most, he has a distorted perception of such, and this distortion is what led to his ruin.
I think I understand what you mean now. At the precise moment, I don't have any reply.
That is a good point, Josh, but I have to ask you, do you think anyone has ever had a proper understanding of the pursuit of knowledge? By your own reasoning, you would have to admit that anybody with such an understanding would be, as they would have no ignorance of the subject.
Well, I would say that all mortals are subject to some amount of error.
Well, in that case, how do you know that your ignorance of the pursuit of knowledge isn't distorting your perception, which leads you to say ignorance is vice?
To be clear, you are saying that since I don't have an understanding of the pursuit of truth, and hence truth itself, I'm susceptible to ignorance and evil, including the ignorance which may lead me to say that ignorance is.
Yes, that's right.
Let me first clarify that ignorance isn't vice, but rather it is what leads to vice. However, I know that my pursuit of truth is understood well enough such that I don't fall into basic refutation from the fact that I can logically demonstrate my claims to be true.
Well, wouldn't you say that Frankenstein was able to logically demonstrate that he was pursuing the truth? Why do you think your thoughts are superior?
No, Frankenstein was not able to logically demonstrate anything of virtue. This is entirely my point. My thoughts are superior for that reason.
I think bro's being a little bit egotistical, but that seems to be a valid response. But I still must ask, if you know so much of a virtue, then how come you are so susceptible to error?
This is another very good point. Even though I know certain things are good and bad, my lack of understanding of the consequences of evil leads me to sin.
In that case, how would you claim that you truly know what is righteous and not?
To elaborate on my point, I should have rather explained there are multiple levels of knowledge. My function of discursive reasoning leads me to know that something is wrong, yet there is a level beyond logical function which would lead me to understand the consequence ill-doing would have on me.
What do you mean by consequences?
By consequences, I mean the toll evil will take on me, causing me to do yet more evil. To go back to the book, wouldn't you agree that Frankenstein's ego feeds into itself, only to cause him to sin more?
Certainly.
Ah, of course.
Then, you would admit the consequence of evil is that more evil is done.
Woof.
I also agree.
Then what more is there to be said? Do you not agree that the pursuit of knowledge is always virtuous?
I'm speechless.
I only wish you would stay that way.
I admit, your reasoning is well constructed, but I still have one more question.
Certainly. Go ahead.
Meow, wow, 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 woof, woof, woof,
Oh my God,
meow.
that's my line, you idiot.
It's a lot about how Frankenstein's pursuit of knowledge seemingly led to his downfall. But what about the monster?
What do you mean?
I'm assuming that he means the monster wouldn't have been so unhappy if he didn't know what life could be like. For example, after viewing the happiness contained in the family which he observed.
Yes, this is what I mean.
That is pretty easy
Hold
too.
on. I think I understand. Can I just please try and answer this question using your past reasoning?
Go straight ahead.
Thank you. And I just realized I have no idea what I'm talking about. Could you please answer for me instead?
Yeah, you're pathetic, my friend, but sure, I will answer. Let us consider the monster's life if he had not known the happiness contained within the aspects of mankind. In this case, it is unclear whether or not the monster would be happy or sad, or whether or not he would feel any emotion at all. For the present, let us assume he would have neutral emotions. We can now compare this to the suffering the monster endured after learning the truth behind his life. I admit that at first glance, it seems like the monster's pursuit of knowledge led to his suffering. However, we must ask ourselves why the monster suffered from the knowledge. Was there anything intrinsic about this knowledge that forced the monster to suffer? When you think about it, there is no reason why the monster had to even grow the slightest bit angry over the information he discovered. He could have simply accepted his fate and moved on with his life in the best way possible. Additionally, both of you guys seem to have the supposition that suffering is bad. We don't have time to dive into that question today, but I would challenge us and say that suffering to some degree is good, as it conditions a healthy mind.
That's a very good point. I didn't really think about it like that.
I agree.
Well, is that the last of your questions?
I have no other questions at this time.
Same here.
Then, both of you guys would agree that the pursuit of knowledge is always a virtue, and that the suffering and evil endured by the monster and created by Frankenstein was not the result of such a pursuit?
Yes, I relent.
Indeed, I must relent too.
Then let us end the conversation at present and begin our descent into full femboy twinkness. Surely this must be the highest expression of knowledge.
Oh, Josh, you're so wise.
Yes! Meow, meow, meow.
Good boys.
I guess this concludes today's conversation. Seems like the pursuit of knowledge is completely virtuous after all.
Yes, thank you for tuning into Twink Talks. I would like to thank our host, Joshua Hoover, for hosting David and I.
Stay twinky.